Today we are going to be announcing the release of 0.20.0 in ZenML Server, the launch of the ZenML Server and the ZenML Dashboard. Um, I will start off with perhaps one of the most exciting things about the release. So we have um, the dashboard, which is now a separate project which exists in its own repository that is launched within ZenML. So like one of the big complaints about ZenML was always that, oops, sorry. Like one of the big complaints about ZenML was that it was no front end. There was no UI. There was no um, so there was no way to understand how ZenML looked like, except if you use the CLI. And if you now look at ZenML, that was probably the biggest thing that we lacked. And it was probably our Achilles heel. We didn't really have any place to show the stacks, the stack components, the pipelines, the runs. And finally, today, I'm so excited to note that we have a UI, we have a dashboard. It comes built in to the ZenML package. It is also, most excitingly, open source, just like the ZenML project itself. Yeah. So, so I will obviously go through the dashboard today with you in the demo, but I think there's a lot more things to dive into. Just a short thing about the ZenML dashboard. The way it works is that you can use it locally. So if you're in single player mode of ZenML, then you can quite easily deploy it with ZenML up, this new command that we have with the latest release. And with the default username and empty password, you will be able to log in and see all your stacks which are local, all your pipelines, so on and so forth. So that's something that you get for free. We had to work around a lot of things with React and JavaScript and Python to get that going, but it eventually did end up working. In the back, what's happening is it's serving a fast API app. So we're quite excited about that. So that's the UI, and I'll talk more about how the UI can be deployed. But in order to understand how the UI can be used, of course, we have to talk about architecture. And this is probably the single biggest change that ZenML has ever done. And the change is we are now transitioning the project into becoming a server-based application. So if you guys have used ZenML and in the Slido we saw that you did, you would have understood ZenML to be a distributed client-based architecture, meaning that we had many libraries installed. Every client used those libraries locally to connect to the infrastructure. There was no central place where everything got tracked or everything ran through. And this was obviously making ZenML flexible, but at the end, we did sort of need a store for stacks, which used to be the stack stores. And we needed a store for pipelines, which used to be the metadata store. And because we had these two databases that we had to keep in sync all the time, it caused a huge problem with developing ZenML features. And while we struggled a lot to not make this change early, because it's quite an involved architecture to start off with, we finally got to a place in the project where we had enough time and resources where we could transition it into a typical client-server architecture. So this is something that you might be familiar with any other application, MLflow, for example, or Qflow. So they run through a central API in order to actually get to any any application. So this is how the architecture now looks like. So you have the ZenML client, which is installed locally. So you do pip install ZenML and you get it. Then you have your pipelines and your default stack still local. So ZenML will stay local. You don't need to launch servers, or you don't need to do anything which would be very hard to configure. It just works off the bat, just like you're used to. So if you're in single player mode, you would feel more than comfortable using ZenML, just like you always have done. However, What will change is if once you transition to the cloud and when you have remote stacks, when you have cloud stacks, things in production, then rather than deploying a database for the ML metadata store and provisioning a MySQL and having those certificates, you guys must have read the docs many times about those, and we struggled a lot at the start to get that right, get that user experience right. Rather than doing all of that, you actually have to deploy a ZenML server instead. And that ZenML server has replaced the role of the metadata store. And we can dive a bit deeper into how that looks like, because this is important. It is the biggest change in this release and has enabled all the other features that I'm going to speak about. It also is a very big breaking change. So for those of you who are already using ZenML, also in production, if you want to upgrade, you would now need to deploy the ZenML server rather than having a deployed metadata store. So let's dive into it. So if you have, for example, the local case, you have the ZenML client, and the ZenML client has, of course, your user code. It has the CLI. Locally, it also had the version of the metadata store and this Zen store, the YAML files that we kept locally. So we have gotten rid of the metadata store and the YAML files completely, and we've replaced it locally with the SQLite interface. So now everything that ZenML does is tracked centrally with the SQLite database. Everything is in one sort of directory and quite clean and synchronized. That's the local case. You don't need to have a server in this case. The client directly talks to the databases if you're local. That's one of the things we wanted to do very importantly, because there are some people who can't run external processes, or we didn't want our local client to spin up a external daemon that we had to manage. We just wanted it to work with the database. So it still works like that. In the remote case, it was a bit different. So we used to have everything local as before. So before 0.20, we then had to run through the metadata store in order to run pipelines. So deploying a metadata store, provisioning it, it had to be part of the stack, and we only supported MySQL. And that's caused this weird effect of having a YAML database and having a metadata store externally, which was not really synced. And that led to the obvious problem of how do you share stacks? How do you share configurations within a team? So ZenML, in that sense, was a bit restrictive in as to how people could share stacks and share configurations and pipelines with each other. And with this release, of course, what has happened is that because the metadata store concept has gone and a server is now in front of it, again, a fast API-based server, that server is a very efficient application that serves not only the clients, so you can have as many clients as you want, and stores your stacks and pipelines, but it actually also serves the dashboard that I've showed you. So the dashboard also consumes from that API. And now we have this sort of multi-tenant deployment scenario, which is way more productionizable and sort of more like an application that you might be used to rather than what ZenML used to be. Right, so that's the theoretical part. How does it actually work? I already showed you ZenML up. Like ZenML up, what it does is it spins up a local dashboard for you, and that will work without any problem. So that's something that I can show you in a second. The React files, the build files of the JavaScript are packaged inside the PyPy package. So you actually don't need to do anything. You don't need to have anything installed. It just serves the HTML, the static files. However, of course, if you want to deploy it in the cloud, then we have this new command called ZenML deploy. And the ZenML deploy command is a single-click utility which has a one-click deployment to, for now, I believe AWS and GCP are supported. And in the future, Azure will be shortly supported as well. It's sort of a shorthand utility, just like the stack recipes, to deploy ZenML in the cloud. And this is something that we've reused the stack recipe logic for. So the stack recipes also had the similar purpose, right? To deploy infrastructure on the cloud, and ZenML deploy also now deploys the ZenML infrastructure on the cloud for you. So you don't have to do much. You just need to run this command. If you have a deployed ZenML instance, then you can either connect to it or disconnect from it. So there's a new command called ZenML connect, in which you give a URL, and in that URL you connect, and with the username password you can get in. And the ZenML status gives you the current status of that. Yeah, so that's really the cool bit, that we didn't want this to feel like that this was a huge breaking change, and it was now such a headache. We still wanted to have that Zen experience with ZenML. So we wanted to make the deployment of ZenML as easy as possible. And Jayesh and Stefan, who are in the call, I know, just did fantastic work in the team to be able to make that deployment very easy. So with the ZenML deploy command, you can get it running on AWS or GCP very fast. So if you have a Vertex stack or something that will work off the bat, you just need to take the metadata store out to, excuse me. And if you have Azure or something, or if you have Heroku or anything where you want to deploy ZenML, then it's just a Docker image that's freely available. There's also a Helm chart that you can use to deploy it on Kubernetes. So it's all pretty standard and straightforward for all for everyone who's deployed applications with the cloud. Right. So again, I would just say the ZenML dashboard is open source. So if you actually, this link is maybe broken, I'll fix it. It's ZenML dashboard. So this link, if you go here, you will see that the ZenML dashboard repo just got open sourced and currently has 5 stars, of course. But you can see this is its own repository in its own right. We will maintain it. We will receive pull requests and issues on it directly, and it has its own README file and user experience and everything, which is documented. So it's sort of an independent sister project, sort of like the Stack Recipe project. Nice. I would also like to give a shout out to the Invention guys who helped us build this application. So if you're on the call, it's a fantastic organization that helped to build this out, and they're based in Pakistan. Just a fantastic job, and they just got the look and feel right what we wanted. Cool. So that's the most exciting changes that we wanted to announce. A lot of the other stuff is things that you just need to know. So let's move on. But I'm very happy to take questions if you have any already. So as it is a community call, so if there's any question, willing to entertain that now. I'll open the architecture diagram for that. Cool. Okay. So we also have a Q&A at the end. You can also leave the questions in the chat. I will read them. Yeah, as I said, we're here to answer the questions, and hopefully you're as excited about this launch as we are. Nice. So what does that mean? So now you have a server, you have a dashboard. What does that mean? Well, it means collaboration, right? So rather than having to now export and import your stacks or put them in source code, try to version them through Git, ZenML provides you now a native way to store your stacks and stack components and flavors. Everything is centrally tracked. And if you have a teammate, all they have to do is ZenML connect. And then we have this notion of shared stacks. So you can actually share a stack with your team. So you can do ZenML stack share and then the name of the stack. And the name of the stack actually can also be now like represented as an ID. So we also introduced IDs now with names. So it's not just names anymore, it's also IDs. So if you have an ID or a name, you can actually share a stack with the entire team, and they would be able to just do ZenML stack list, and they would be able to see the same stacks that you created. And of course, they would be able to set them active and run them and run different pipelines on them. So that's really cool, and and this is probably the best way to now use ZenML. I would say that the export-import functions are more convenience features, especially the import function is usually helpful if you want to just get started quickly. But for people who want to use ZenML in production, we would suggest you use the shared stack concept. Also, if you do have, of course, um, like if you are coming for the hackathon or the competition, which is happening in a few days, then you should also definitely have a ZenML server deployment and share your stacks with your team. All right. All right. One of the last things that I would like to talk about is the configuration. So back when, like, ZenML used to be a hodgepodge of configuration options. So let me name a few. So we used to have enable ML flow, enable weights and biases. That used to be one way to configure a stack component, namely the experiment trackers. We had a data validation component, ylogs, which also had their own decorator, enable ylogs. We used to have a with config method, which used to be a random method where you could give a YAML file, and that sort of worked. Sometimes it didn't, sometimes it did. Um, there were also way more, let's say, like way more standard options. So you could put enable cache in the decorator, you could put it in the run function, you could give requirements in the pipeline. That's a very standard way of doing that still. If you wanted to specify materializers, you do that when you do like in the steps. So you do with return materializers. So what I'm trying to say is that there was many different ways of configuring these objects, and often you guys, so the people in the community used to say to us, it's really hard to understand the configuration options, right? I mean, am I supposed to go through the decorator? Am I supposed to go through the pipeline run function? And that sort of grew organically from a project that never centralized these things. And now we took the chance of the architectural rehaul to also centralize configuration. So the two concepts that we are introducing today are base parameters and base settings. So base parameters are like your step config object. So we used to have base step config. We renamed that to base parameters, and these function exactly the same as before. They're just renamed. So you have these are objects which you send to the step to parameterize your functions, right? So those work standard the way they should. Um, However, the settings is a whole new concept. So now we are today deprecating a whole bunch of configuration standards that we had. So we are sort of letting go of all of the enable underscore XXX decorators. So that will break. I know you ML flow people definitely will face that breaking change. So you have to change that. And also, we are deprecating the with return materializers and a whole bunch of other options that I said in favor of the settings object. So the settings object is a centralized concept in ZenML now, which is a dictionary that you can pass to the step or the pipeline. And here you can put in everything. So if you have an experiment tracker in your step that you want to configure, you do that through there, just like I've given in this example. If you have Docker settings and you want to change your requirements, you do that through the Docker settings object. And then you pass that in the settings dictionary. So everything is sort of centralized into this one object, which is passed to the steps and the pipelines. And there's a hierarchy between these two. We have docs on them. And sorry, my throat is acting up today. So we have settings that go through the step and the pipeline. And the coolest thing about this is not only is this a cleaner experience on the user experience side, it is definitely a more centralized experience for the entire. So it's a centralized way of the server to track these things. So you can actually track these things centrally. So if you have an experiment tracker and you give it an experiment name, you can actually query in the post-execution workflow your settings and get that back. And this is the start of reproducibility and provenance that we always had in the back of our head with ZenML. And that's something that that is now completely possible by centralizing these things. Right. And lastly, and this is the sort of the last slide. we have separation of the configuration from the implementation for flavors. So for those of you who have already used NML, we have sort of this hierarchy. So we have stacks. Stacks are consisting of stack components, which are themselves bunched into categories like orchestrators, blah, blah, blah. And each category has a flavor or multiple flavors associated with it. So for example, you could have a stack which has an orchestrator called orchestrator with a flavor of Kubeflow, right? And you configure this through your CLI. So you do ZenML orchestrator register, and then you give it a flavor, and you give it all the configuration options. But before this change, you actually needed to have Kubeflow installed to do this. So because we coupled the implementation to the configuration in the code, and you didn't really have a way to know what the configuration was beforehand. So you were just sort of guessing in the command line what it was, or looking at the docs, which is not really the best experience. With ZenML 0.20.1, we have a new command called flavor describe, which actually gives you a very clean representation of all the parameters available to you. So for example, you have Kubeflow pipelines UI port, Kubeflow hostname, everything which Kubeflow needs when you actually register it. And this is sort of only the user-facing change. In the back, all of our integrations and all of our flavors have been rewritten to separate into two different classes, one which implements and one which actually has just the configuration, which is a pydantic object for those of you who were wondering. Cool. Right. So a lot of you are probably looking at these changes and saying, "Oh my God, the product has changed. What do we do? What's happening? Um, if we have something running in production, how do we migrate?" Well, in previous releases, we used to have automatic migration for most major breaking changes. For this one, we couldn't quite manage that. The one thing that we do have now is profile migration. So profiles have also been deprecated. It's something that that we like you can read about in the docs. So we have automatically your profile will be migrated to the new paradigm. But for all the other changes, we have a very nice guide, which is very, very extensive actually, where we actually go through all the changes, talk about, for example, how to replace the metadata store if you have the Kubeflow metadata store, if you have the Kubernetes metadata store, how to replace those, how to yeah, get the dashboard, yeah, and I think most importantly, the configuration changes that I talked about are all here. So small things like the repository object is now called client. The base step config, as I said, is base parameters. We have a video recording of those things as well. But this is only relevant for those of you who have used ZenML before or who are using it. For those of you who are new, of course, you don't need to do any of this. You will just learn the new syntax. Right. So we're at 1736, which is the perfect time for a demo. So before I jump into the demo, would you mind asking, or if you have any questions, I would be very happy to answer them. The entire ZenML team is here today. Everybody is chomping at the bit to learn what everyone thinks about in this call and to answer your questions. So I'll just wait maybe 30 seconds while I set up. If you have any questions, leave them on the chat.
There's a question here from Victor.
Okay, let me just read it. So the pipeline visualizations will be available in the dashboard in a cloud stack that uses the Vertex. Yeah, for example, will it be available both in the dashboard and in the Vertex UI? Yes, yes. So you will be able to see your Vertex pipelines in Vertex as always. So nothing has changed in that front. You're still deploying pipelines on Vertex or on Kubeflow. So you could use the native visualization from those. But the ZenML visualization is sort of catered towards a different thing, which I'll show in a few seconds. But like nothing has has changed in that sense. Hope that answers the question. Okay, then I will jump into the demo. Right. For this, I'm just going to use my VS Code, and I'm running the quick start. So the first thing I'm going to do, of course, you just can do pip install, and then ZenML is there. The one thing that you might want to do more than normal is you might want to do pip install server with the server extra. This actually gives you the ability to run ZenML up and ZenML deploy. So if, for example, if I do ZenML up, you can see that it's starting the servers for the local Zen server. This is going to launch the local Zen server and the local dashboard on my machine and give me a username and a password to log in from. So let's give it a second and let's see what happens. Of course, it is a live demo, so something that never happened before is happening. Okay, so we do have some sort of administration state active. I don't know what this is. This is probably a PID error in a weird state for me. Maybe if I do ZenML disconnect first, and ZenML up again. So I was connected to a remote ZenML server. Maybe that caused it. Not quite sure. Anyway, that doesn't seem to work, but it will work for you. I do promise you. If you do pip install right now, it will work. But this wasn't the main point of the demo anyway, because what I wanted to show you was a deployed ZenML instance. So if you see ZenML deploy -- help, you will see that there is a way to deploy ZenML in the cloud. Before this call, I already deployed ZenML onto the cloud in AWS. I will just find the URL right now. So yes, that's the URL. And if I open that in my browser, you can see that this is a deployed ZenML instance. So this is running on AWS. In this case, you can see this is a giveaway and was deployed by us for internal use, but you can get this running for you as well. And you can see that the server is deployed on the same address as the API. So if you go to /docs here, you'll actually be able to see Swagger docs for those of you who know Fast API. And we have a whole API now specification, which allows you to get pipelines and get roles and get runs, everything which you might expect from an API. But that's like nothing for the demo today. What I would like to do today is maybe just create a stack and see what happens. So first, let's go through the UI. This is the homepage. You get to see your stacks, your components, your pipelines, and your runs. If you go to settings here, you would be able to see the name. So I am able to configure that name. I will change that to my name for now. And you can see that I can also change username and stuff. Right now, I only have one person in this project, but I am able to invite more people. So if I, for example, was to invite, let's say, Stefan to this, then this generates a unique invite token for me. And if I copy that and I go into an incognito tab, so I'm not signed in, and let's say Stefan is doing this, then they would be able to do a login and give then their password and register. And here I'm able to then log in. And there's now, if I go to my settings, you would be able to see there are two members, and one of them is Stefan. So Stefan, is my colleague, now would be able to log in with the credentials that I provided. So that's very cool. So like users are now a first-class citizen in ZenML, and of course this is the pathway for us to do role-based access control and all those things. If you see on the left-hand side, I have three things: pipeline, stacks, and stack components. These are all first-class citizens in ZenML, and they are what you expect. So the pipelines look exactly how you would expect. So you have all my pipelines. So you can see this pipeline ran not so long ago. It's called pipeline 2. If I click on this pipeline, I would be able to see a unique specification of this pipeline. So this specification is a brand new intermediate representation of what a pipeline is. Again, something that we've talked about in our docs. And if I go to my runs, I would be able to see how many times this pipeline ran. So I can go back to this view, and if I wanted to flatten this out and just see all the runs, I could also see those. So I can get to the same pipeline like this, and this is actually the pipeline run page. In the pipeline run page, you can see, for example, where it ran, what was the name, and all the settings that I talked about. So if I was configuring it with extra settings, I would be able to see them here. And we have, as we just spoke about, a new visualization. This is right now a bit experimental. It does work as you would expect. So you can click on the steps and the artifacts. It's a bit like the tag visualizer we had. And you can excitingly, you can see the artifact stores and where the artifacts are. So you can see, for example, that this was in an S3 bucket. And you can see the inputs and outputs and all the provenance and lineage you need from a run. This is something that we're heavily working on right now, and in the future you might see many improvements. So for example, having URLs for Q. So for example, if this was deployed on Qflow, then I would be able to click through straight to Qflow. I could click through straight to the URI and link everything. So this sort of would be the central representation of a pipeline run in ZenML. So if you have an MLflow experiment tracker and so on and so forth. So that's very, very exciting. And if you see, for example, I can also see which stack it ran on, which brings me to the stacks page. In the stacks page, you can see that I have 2 stacks right now. So I have my default stack as always, and I have a new stack that I created, which has my AWS stack. And this is something that you might have done many times anyway. So for example, I have my secret manager or my MLflow experiment tracker. Let's click at this. That opens up my experiment tracker list on the left side and shows me exactly the configuration of my MLflow. So it shows me where my MLflow is deployed, what the password is. I mean, this should be in a secret usually if it's via, but right now we put it, yeah, we'll take it out after we put it on YouTube. So this is where MLflow is deployed. Maybe we can even look at it if it's still deployed. Yeah, I mean, I think the ingress is down, but anyway, you would be able to log in and see all your infrastructure components. And this is very interesting that you can actually see where this experiment tracker ran on which pipeline. So for example, in this one. Cool. How does this all work? I mean, it's through the API, as I told you. And if I want to do it on the CLI, then I can do exactly what I did now. So I can do, rather than going through the login screen, I can actually do ZenML connect -- no verify SSL, give it the URL, and it will ask me for the password. I will actually log in with Stefan and assume the identity of Stefan. And now I would be able to see all the stacks as well. So rather than now listing my local stacks, which is the previous behavior, now I can see, for example, the default stack. Right now, if I wanted to create a new stack, let's say I registered another stack, and now I don't have to give it a metadata store anymore. So I just need to give it the default artifact store and the default orchestrator. Then this will try to register this. And what? Multiple components have been found for the name default. The components listed above all share the same. Please specify the component by full or partial ID. Okay, so now we have multiple stack components with this name, which is a consequence of having shared default stores. So I have Hamza and Stefan, and Hamza and Stefan both have something called default, right? So I'm unable to register this stack, but what I can do is I can give it IDs, I think, right? So what I can do instead is I can list all my orchestrators, and I can list all my artifact stores, and only pick the one. So only pick the ones that are local to me, just as a showcase. But like these are the sorts of use cases which are now super interesting that you start to see. Okay, so now let's do ZenML stack register another stack, and rather than giving the orchestrator as a name, I'll give it as an ID. That also works now. So this should theoretically pick up and now register a new stack. So you can see another stack successfully registered. If I go back into my dashboard, I would indeed be able to see another stack and would be able to see all the components that are made out of it. So I can click on it and I can see that it was local, no runs associated with it yet. And I can see that the author is Stefan. Now, if I, for example, wanted to run or if I wanted to run a pipeline on it, then that would be as easy as doing Python run.py. This is just going to create a simple pipeline. And with the, I mean, as you know, this is Stefan's or mine default stack. So it's still running locally. So it's running with the default orchestrator and the default artifact store. Everything is stored in my local computer, but everything about the metadata of this is still being tracked centrally. So I can actually go over to my dashboard and be able to probably see a new run. I mean, this takes, so this has some, so we do have a hit here in terms of performance because you are now going through an API, and we make a lot of API calls when you run into this configuration. But let me see now. I should be able to see a running stack or running pipeline. Yeah, this is, I think this is the one. New pipeline, exactly. And I'm able to see, for example, the pipeline that I just ran. Author is Stefan, created here. And if I go back, I can actually probably see, which stack it ran on. Give me a second, sorry. The dashboard is also new for me. So yeah, I mean, I'm able to sort of reproduce. Like there's one thing missing here that I noticed, the stack should be at the top. That's something maybe as a bug for us. But I mean, I am able to see the visualization, and I'm able to see, for example, where everything is stored, and so on and so forth. All right. All right. I think for now that's what I wanted to show you in terms of the demo. Perhaps one more thing, that we can do while this is running. So let's say that I have this stack now, and right now, if someone else logged onto it, they would not be able to use this stack. Of course, it's just my personal stack, and nobody can do it. So this is to sort of have role-based authentication. So you still have this notion of shared stacks and not shared stacks. You could, of course, share a stack if you wanted. So I could, for example, share another stack, and then this would set the stack to be shared. So if I now do ZenML stack list, then I would be able to see that the icon changes. And if I log in with Hamza, then I would be able to use that stack. I mean, right now it doesn't make sense because it's my default Stefan stack, which I can't really use anyway, but I would be able to see the configuration and all those things. Right. Cool. Yeah, so that's all for the demo for now. I think one thing that I have missed was I ran a Qflow pipeline. Let me see if I still have that up. So maybe just to answer the question that came up. So the question was, hey, like, what about the other visualizations? For example, the Qflow pipeline one. So you still have Qflow pipelines, right? Or Vertex or whatever. You're still able to see everything that Qflow pipeline gives you. So this is the pipeline that corresponds to this. but it's just a different view into the data. So you would see all your inputs and outputs. You see ZenML specific things, so where the data is stored and all those things, which Kubeflow doesn't know about, right? The Kubeflow is just an orchestrator that executes the workload. So you can look at both visualizations and both views in different lights. So for example, if I wanted to see the ML flow experiment tracker that's associated with this, I would go through ZenML. If I wanted to see the logs of the pipeline, I would go through Kubeflow. So yeah, that's just a small difference. Yeah, that's all. We're almost out time. So in this extended community hour, all we're looking for right now, this is a tentative release, of course, after I believe it was 40,000 lines of code that changed in the last 1.5 months. So all of us here at ZenML have been working super hard to get a better product that looks like this. Of course, there will be some bugs and kinks that you might notice with this new release. So let us know. The best way of doing that is to create a GitHub issue or to write on Slack. We do expect to get those in the first few days, and we'll fix and maybe make some minor releases. But after maybe a week or so, we'll get to some sort of form of stability. And then there's lots more exciting features in the future, including things like DVC and hyperparameter tuning and all those other things that are on the roadmap. So this just is the stage for the brand new ZenML journey. We're very happy to have every one of you with us on the journey. And I would now open the floor to questions if you have any questions about the new architecture or anything new that you saw here today. Thank you.
There is this one unanswered question by, let me see, Ayoinka. Ayoinka, you there to ask the question? Okay, maybe I'll just read it. Hi all, I'm new to this, but is there a limit to the number of deployment iterations that can happen in a day?
Number of deployment iterations of what, I think, would be the clarification. So if you're talking about the number of deployments of pipelines, you can deploy as many pipelines as you want. If you're talking about the deployments of ZenML servers, then you can also have as many ZenML servers as you want. Usually there's only one ZenML server though. So yeah, I mean, because you're new, it's basically, you can register it as much as your API will hold. And it is a central service that has a limit. And you can always expand that on Kubernetes and on the database. Right, so there was a few more questions. I'll just run through them because I know that you guys have been answering on the back. I just noticed that. Do you have an LDAP integration? No, we do not. It's an enterprise feature though, which we might support if an enterprise comes to us. But for now, it's like the community is here. It's very hard to support something like LDAP in an open source project. Server and dashboard changes look very promising. Looking forward to see the Azure implementation. Yes, Tunai, we know that you're a big Azure aficionado. We will have Azure very soon. It is one of, always on our list. Is it possible to configure a secret manager on an experiment tracker? Yes, you are able to reference secrets in the experiment tracker at will. So the secret manager, actually, this is a future change that might happen. The secret manager might also move out of the stack, but for now it's part of the stack. And once you have a secret manager within the stack, you are able to mark configuration as secrets, and that will also be reflected in the dashboard. You would not be able to see sensitive values. Right. Great presentation. Thank you very much. Amit says it looks great. Lawrence asked, are the error logs out into the ZenML server, or would users need to go to the orchestrator/step where it was run to get the error logs? Currently, the logs are not registered, Lawrence, in ZenML. As I showed you at the end, the Kubeflow has the logs of the actual run. We are, however, trying to, or I think it's part of our roadmap. It might be a bit further down the line, though. We want to make it easy through a function to call the logs in the ZenML client directly. So you can already do that with deployed models. You can also do server logs, at least locally, but for orchestrator logs, we don't have those yet. Is it possible to delete a given pipeline from Valentine? Uh, it is possible to delete a given pipeline, and then the runs are marked as empty. So you are able to actually delete a pipeline, just as you are able to delete a stack. This is really neat. Looking forward to trying it out. Thanks, Ed. Shubham, awesome work. Ayo Ninkas, Akash, you confirmed it was, or like they confirmed it was pipelines. So thank you very much for that. I mean, pipelines, you can deploy as much as you want. So just keep launching them. Wilbur, also a old advocate of ours, very impressive. I'm excited to try all these new features, try to warm up for the October challenge. Us too. Thanks for the presentation and these new features. Can't wait to test it. Right. So, I mean, it seems like those were the initial questions. I'm sorry, my throat is gone basically now after a month and a half of trying to get this release out. Anyway, so now that the release is out, everybody knows that, or well, for those of you who don't know, in a few days, next Monday, we will be launching the ZenML Month of MLOps competition. This competition is going to be a battleground for you to test your ZenML skills and your MLOps skills in general. And whoever has the best ZenML pipelines will win. It will be judged by the most fantastic of judges. So we have Goku Mohandas, we have Chip Hewen, we have Anthony Goldblum, Chris Fry. All these people have agreed to judge these ZenML pipelines. And it's so fantastic to see so many people joined up. So we have 150, close to 100, close to 150 registrations for the competition already. And I'm sure that everyone will have a really cool time enjoying the new ZenML version and creating this pipeline. So if you haven't signed up yet, please do sign up. 170, Alex is correct. 170 teams, that's amazing. So if you haven't signed up yet, do sign up, call your friends over, battle it out, get the chance to present in front of the most fantastic of judges and win cash prizes at the end. And if you don't want to do that, just try out ZenML. The quick start is there. The release is out. And we look forward to your feedback on GitHub and Slack. Thank you. Dixon, maybe back to you for final words.
All right, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. Super looking forward to all the awesome stuff the ZenML team is putting forward. And I posted a link to a release blog, so it's ready if you want to check out what's new in the release. And there are some other relevant links as well in the blog post. And there's also a migration guide and a place to report bugs. And yes, just like Hamza said, we will be launching our MLOps competition starting next Monday. So what's next? So if you're in the competition, you've signed up, and now is the time to probably team up. So we've also have like a specific channel in our Slack to find team members or those who wants to have a team member, or you can optionally join it individually as you. All right. And next, in our community meetings next week and onwards, we are planning like a 4-week, a series of meetings in 4 weeks where we will slowly walk through what is in the new ZenML. So for example, week 1, we might be going through how to set up, how to run examples. If you are new, then you can start to register for our next meeting. Maybe next week, the second week, we'll be trying to use some modeling library like PyTorch. Week 3, maybe we'll do something related to deployment, and maybe week 4, we'll do monitoring related stuff. So if you haven't already, then you can sign up for our community meeting next week. All right, so I think that about concludes our meeting today. Is there anything more to add, Adam or Hamza, before we end?
No, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm looking forward to see everyone on Slack.
See you. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.